hope I didn't waste all of my emotions when we were we were off air. We got to have to do it all over again. Oh, Lance Goyke, what's going on, man? Thank you so much for coming on today so we can chat about squats and stuff.
I love it. I'm excited. I love talking about squats. There aren't many things I'm opinionated about, but squats might actually be one of them.
Yes. Yes. I can't wait. So as we were just joking about, squats are a subject that I am still bewildered by. And I mean that in the sense that when I go to gyms, like here in Salt Lake, or when I travel, when I go to bigger gyms and I watch people squat, or I see people still talking about squatting on the interwebs, I am continually blown away by the fact that we're still cueing knees out and sit back in a squat. I thought this was something that we had put to rest. We haven't done this for at least 8 years. I'm trying to think the last time I coached somebody to sit back and push their knees out in a squat. But it's still, I think it is more the norm than how we coach the squat. And it drives me insane. And I'm trying to figure out what the gap is. Like, what is not being clearly communicated here? Why do we still have so many people doing squats this way when we know that it's better to do squats this other way? So there's clearly a communication issue, education issue. There's something being missed, lost in translation here. And I'm trying to figure out what it is. And so I wanted to have you on today to talk squats because I know you're passionate about squats. You're better with the anatomy and biomechanics than I am. And so I wanted to just dive into this and talk about the characteristics of a squat. Maybe this squat to hinge spectrum, where things fall on this spectrum, how we can think about this movement, what this movement should actually look and feel like for people when they do it. Why is knees out, sit back not a great option unless you fit within this one very particular subset of the population that we will talk about? That's kind of what we want to go over today.
That's a great teaser.
Yes, that is a great teaser. I hope everyone is hooked. You're all hooked. No one's going to leave now. But where do you want to start? I'll let you go. Where do you think the best place is to start in this realm?
So I was actually thinking about that. So I think we can try to do a squat course. I feel like a squat course is more helpful when you're there and you're coaching and it's learn by doing. So I don't know that I want to make a comprehensive course on squatting in the next 20 minutes or whatever. But
yeah. No, we won't be able to go there. So where can we go that's going to be beneficial for people listening?
What I would think is first, we have to ask ourselves, why is that cue of push your knees out, sit your hips back? Why is that even here? And there's two answers in my mind. One, well, okay, let's say three. Okay, let's say two. Triplanar compensation of somebody's body. And the reason that comes down into two dysfunctions. One is I shift forward, therefore I should shift back. And the other one is that my knees collapse, therefore I should push them out. And then the third one, maybe we'll talk about later with all the canvas suits and stuff. So the thing we have to ask ourselves, why do the knees drive in? Why does the weight shift forward? That is the structure of our body. If our weight shifts forward, we can catch ourselves. We can push through our calves. We can come up onto our toes even, and we can catch ourselves before we fall. If your weight shifts back over your heel the same amount, you will fall, or you'll have to take a step, right? And so it's either less safe for your genes or it's embarrassing, right? So we don't want that. The other part of this, outside of that sagittal plane, just body structure, is the frontal and transverse plane body structure, hence triplanar compensations, right? So there's this angle of between the hip and the knee that we call the Q angle. It's wider in those who have wider hips, right? Generally females, generally some females have wider hips in And as they do that, right? So your knees come down because your feet want to stay under your body. And so if the hips are out wider, then the knees have to be coming in. The femur bone angles in more. And we say that's a greater Q angle. What that does is it angles that femur bone inward, but the shin has to stay vertical because gravity is perpendicular to the ground, right? So if I take that and I just put gravity down through an angled in shin bone, try to picture it, but guess where the knees go? They fall in, right? And so this Q angle is the other part of the structure. So we don't want to fall backward. We're prone to falling forward, and we're prone to our knees coming out. So if you watch somebody who's never worked out in their life, they do a lot of this knee cave forward shift thing. If you've ever coached these people and you say, hey, can you show me a squat? Often, whoa, horn. Okay. If you've ever coached these people, oftentimes, as you ask them to squat down, their heels will come up almost immediately. Sometimes they'll just balance on the balls of their feet. Their knees will shoot way forward. Their heels will never touch the ground. And then they'll come back up. And then they'll say, oh man, did you hear that? My knee popped. Because they're throwing so much force through the knee. Now, squats are, I would argue, a knee exercise. They're also a hip exercise, right? But they should load the knee through the joint. But the issue is when I adopt those patterns, instead of compressing that joint, which the joint is really good at dealing with, I shear that joint. So the femur bone and the tibial plateau come apart. Is that fair to say, James?
Yeah. I'm on the same page with you so far. All good.
Oh, okay. So you get newbies who collapse their knees and they fall forward a lot. So obviously you would think, sit back, push your knees out, and that'll correct everything. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it does. And that, I think, is what kind of perpetuated this. I don't know who the first person to, really popularize that. But the other theory that James presented to me before we started recording that I'm going to steal right now is powerlifting. Louis Simmons, West Side Barbell, starts coaching his lifters. When you squat, you need to really hard, drive your knees out and sit your butt back. What that does when you're if you have not put a squat suit on, you should try it once. It's literally like taking a painting canvas and wrapping it around your waist. So when I sit back, I stretch that canvas more, and you can, if the suit is stiff enough, you can just hold there effortlessly in the bottom of a squat. Just your body weight and the suit eventually hit this equilibrium where you just float at the bottom. And they use that to help rebound themselves out of the bottom of that squat. And so there's the element of sitting back to get the stretch, and there's the element of the knees coming out, because otherwise, with the tension in that suit, your knees are going to collapse. Louis trains the strongest people in the world and has for a really long time.
And they're all suited low bar back squat powerlifters. So we had to make sure that we put that. This is one of my big qualms, and I hate this in our industry. People don't place these things in context. They just see, oh, this person's really fucking strong, and this is how they're coached to squat, so I should squat like that. But you aren't a suited power lifter. You probably don't low bar back squat. So therefore, that is a terrible way for you to do this exercise, right? Again, it's all about context. For that population, that setup and cueing makes the most sense. That is stacking the deck in their favor for them to be as successful as possible to suited back squat the most weight imaginable. For the rest of the population and people listening to this who likely don't have an interest in doing that thing, but they do want to be really strong, they do want to have a very strong squat, right? Most people listening to this, I would imagine, are in that realm of, hey, I want to squat. We have a pretty decent spectrum, right? I want to squat 300, 400, 500. We don't have too many people that are going to be pushing that 600 squat. That's a little bit outside the scope of what we do, right? But I think most people in our realm are trying to either hit a 400 or a 500 pound squat. Okay. is we got to keep all of this in context. They're trying to squat that and still be really athletic and feel good and move well. They're not trying to do it within the domain of low bar suited back squat powerlifter. That distinction is incredibly important, not discussed and talked about enough.
Absolutely. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves is like, you see it a lot, and I don't blame this on them, but you see it a lot in new trainers who can only prescribe what they've done because it worked for them. And they're really excited about it. They're really motivated to be a trainer because it worked for them.
That was me when I first started, 100%. I was just like, hey, based off my experience, here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
I was there. I was in that camp when I was probably 22.
Yeah. I don't know that there's anybody who has become a trainer and didn't like working out first, you know? You're going to give what you like, but those trainers also get really frustrated when what they've done for themselves that worked in the past doesn't work for anybody else or other people, you know? So we can't say, since this has worked for someone, therefore it will work for everyone else. Now, what is the purpose of the squat? I would argue that a squat is, I shouldn't say this to your audience, I suppose, but I would argue that a squat is a better test than it is an exercise even. That's not to say you can't build a 300, 400, 500 pound squat. Mm-hmm. It's still a good goal and it's fun and it's a great exercise.
Yeah.
But in terms of just measuring every joint, like the squat is honestly the only test that I still use because I can see the little compensations, right? So I can use it kind of to isolate joints. And it evaluates everything right away. It's super time efficient.
I think this is really important. I'm going to jump in here super fast because this is going to be a good path for us to go down. So I'm glad you brought this up. There is a distinction and difference between the squat as a movement pattern and the squat as a performance enhancer / performance metric. I think that distinction is what we're getting at right now, which is really important. And I would love for you to dive more into when we're looking at the squat as a assessment tool, as a way to look at human movement, as a way to potentially improve this movement pattern, right? Versus squatting 500 pounds. Because I do think I think it's a different conversation, right? And I've talked about this before to where if we think about placing this movement on a spectrum, it's a very basic squat hinge spectrum, right? On one side, I have a true squat. Going to be characterized by vertical displacement of the pelvis and knees going out over the toes, staying very upright. On the other side of that spectrum, I have a hinge, horizontal displacement of the pelvis with a shin angle that's probably really not changing very much, if at all, right? And then we have some room to play between those two extremes. But when we're talking about the squat as a movement, it's this vertical displacement of the pelvis, right? It's this being able to more or less sit straight down, knees go out over toes, things in that realm. You can open a pelvic outlet, for example, one thing that no one ever talks about. Everyone's just like, oh, my ankles, I can't squat because of my ankles. And it's like, maybe not, right? It's like, you know that wall you feel?
Why are your ankles tight?
Yeah. You know that wall you feel when you get about like, I don't know, about halfway down towards parallel, then you're like, oh no, I got to break. Probably has more to do with your pelvis than anything else. But I'll push this back to you so we can talk about the squat as strictly just a movement pattern, an assessment tool. What are we looking for? A true squat.
Yeah, so the thing that I'm looking for as a coach is I don't want to see any joint restricting you. I can tell you don't have restriction if you can squat all the way down. So all the way down, meaning butt essentially to heels. You want soft tissue approximation, so the calf and the hamstring come together, and that's like I'm all the way there. My knee is totally bent. Sometimes if somebody's had Knee surgeries in the past, you might have restrictions there, especially if, like a friend of mine, if you didn't do your rehab after your ACL, that's a good way to limit your knee flexion.
Why
and
pay
that can
for the
limit your
surgery
squat.
if you're not?
It's the stability he wanted. He didn't want the mobility.
Give me the stiffest joint possible, baby.
The knee is not normally your restrictor, though, unless, barring any injury, something like that. Normally, what people notice is a calf block. Or an ankle block where I need dorsiflexion. I need my knee to be able to go forward, but I need my heel to stay down. And that creates this sharper angle at the ankle. There we go. I was sure I was going to say that wrong. And then the third one is I need full hip flexion. Now, hip flexion is a triplanar movement because that is a ball and socket joint. And as I come down, the orientation of the acetabulum has to change. Now, to manage all of this, we talked about it before, you can't shift your weight forward. If I shift my weight forward, I turn my calf on, I can't dorsiflex my ankle. It's all done. If I shift my weight forward, I kick my back on, I can't use my low back to kind of serve as a counterweight. So ideally, when I get to the bottom, I'm actually going to have a little bit of a round, a little bit of a flattening of the lumbar spine, the low back. And that normally we have a little bit of a forward round, like this lordosis, this arch in the low back. But as I descend, I need that to reverse to achieve the full depth. And that's that pelvic outlet stuff that James was talking about before. If I don't have that, then I have extra tension somewhere because that should be the normal motion. Like physics demands that my low back does that and accompanying pelvic movements, right? So if I don't have that, then I have to start thinking about, okay, what muscles are overactive and why are they overactive? And generally it's because people are shifting forward or because people hold stress, tension, they don't sleep enough, they've got, gut discomfort, or they just squat a whole bunch. They like to hinge a lot, and you're putting a lot of stress on the back. You have a lot of activity in the erector spinae, the QL, and I can't get that reversal in the spine. And if I can't get that reversal, I can't get any of the other reversals that need to happen. But in an ideal unloaded scenario, I would like to see you squat all the way down. Your knees come forward, your butt comes down. You get a very similar angle. It's probably more like this between your shins and your torso. And as you get toward the bottom, you'll almost even come upright a little bit more. Mm-hmm. You'll come out of that dorsiflexion just slightly.
Yeah, one of the cues I like to give people when we're working on this, and one of the things we'll get into just here in a little bit is, and I've thought about this, I've talked to couples about this too, is how realistic is it to do what we're describing right now is what we're going to call air quote. I don't think anything's really perfect, right? But air quote, perfect squat. I'm not sure how realistic it is to do that and actually move a lot of load.
Yes.
Like, I don't think that you're going to squat 500 pounds and be able to do what we're talking about right now. But the goal is still to be able to keep this more as a vertical displacement of a pelvis activity as opposed to just turning it into a glorified hinge / good morning, which is what most of these butt, back, knees out people turn into. And so they just end up with crazy pumped out low backs and knee issues, etc. But a cue that I like in this realm that I tell people, I always get great comments back from people because I put this in the notes in the programs, is keep your asshole directly beneath your ears. Right? Because that's what you tell people, and like they go to squat and they're like, okay, asshole beneath my ears. And then, dude, I have people that can't even get that standing upright. Right?
Yeah.
And then they get it and like, okay, and then they start to squat and they make it probably about 3 inches, and then they all of a sudden feel this happen where they're starting to shoot out backwards. We're getting this counterweight effect that we talked about earlier, where if things are going to drift forward, then we have to counterweight shift ourselves back, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, the asshole under ears cue is one that I really like because people get that one relatively fast.
I think it's important to distinguish, and I mean, I said it and you said it, but I want to reiterate that this ideal testing squat, do you have this mobility and all the requisite joints? that demands that I don't have load. It doesn't demand it, I suppose.
Right, because
what's a way that I go ahead?
I was going to say, I think the counter example and the only example you see on this when Cups and I have talked about it is if you look at, in particular, Chinese or Asian Olympic lifters who do seem to have this capacity to just go like pretty much straight down and straight up in a squat. We do know that the actual structure of their pelvis is different than
their ankle,
right? So like they have some things going on that, because of their heritage and background, is just different than the two of us sitting here who are probably like Northern European white folk. So I think that's the only example I've seen where you're seeing people move real load and they're sticking more to what we're seeing here as this testing type squat deal. But to go back to what you were saying, please continue. Yeah, I think this distinction is going to be really important.
Well, and that's a good point. Like you have to understand that everyone's different. For the testing purposes, what I'd like to see is you not needing a counterweight, like holding a goblet squat, a weight in front of you, and being able to reach this depth. You can train it by adding a counterweight. And though you've added weight, you've made the exercise easier. I think that's an important point that people need to understand. Because you'll start to understand why am I shifting forward and why do I not need to sit back more? You need to shift back, but you don't need to sit back. You don't need to bend over. And you'll feel the accompanying hamstring activity, and you'll be like, oh my God, I actually use my hamstrings in my squat. And your knees will feel better because you're going to get that, you're going to prevent more of the shear forces that go through the knee. So I love all of that. The difference though is if it's loaded, there is a drawback we have to talk about. To train the legs to get big quads, ideally I want to overload with an appropriate weight. I want to push to an appropriate amount of pretty much all of my fatigue. And I want to ideally take my joint through maximum range of motion. So I get maximum deformation of the tissue. And for the quad, that means full knee bend. And in a squat, full knee bend means I go all the way down. But if I have a weight on my back and I go all the way down, I have to we talked about it already, but I have to compromise my spinal position. I have to change my spinal position to achieve that depth and to keep my balance through all of that. What we've learned through Stuart McGill's research on the back is that the back doesn't like to be loaded and move around a whole lot. I think it likes to move around, and we shouldn't try to stabilize it with our lats and stuff. So that's something, a methodology that I might disagree with Dr. McGill on, but I don't want to load it and I don't want to twist it and flex it while I'm loading it. So if I want maximum quad hypertrophy, I should probably push to, squat ass to grass, and I should probably go all the way down. But if I do that, I need to make compromises somewhere. And I would rather do fewer sets, half squat everything so that my spinal position is fine. I'm still getting load on the legs. I probably use a little bit more weight. And then later on, if the goal is really like maximum quad hypertrophy, that's when you're post-fatiguing with some sort of isolation exercise where your spine is out of the equation. It's just the knee. You sit on the quad extension, you bend your knee all the way back, and then you extend it again.
Yep. And this is where we've talked about using machines in training being an important metric here, because this is where I think being able to get on something like a hack squat makes this a far more attainable, I don't want to say goal, but it makes it far more attainable for people to get this full range of motion, really loaded squat, as opposed to, say, putting an SSB bar on your back, which is still better, right? Because I have the weights on my back, but my hands are in front of my body. So I'm still at least getting some type of a counter. I'm making it easier to maintain the stack position that we talk about. Maybe I give you a wedge. So I stack the deck in your favor even more, making it easier for you to sit straight down. So this is where, if we can understand what we're looking for in a squat itself, what do we want a squat pattern to look like? Then I can begin to manipulate how we load this exercise and the tools I'm going to use with the exercise to make it look like how I want it to look, so that I can load it and I can get more strength, hypertrophy, power out of the exercise, because the mechanics of it are better. I'm not having to make as many of these compensations to the spine or other places, right? And we'll go, I have another thought, but we'll go there in a little bit. I'll just want to pass that back to you.
I think that there's another way you can look. So you talked about the wedge, but the other example is squat shoes, Olympic lifting shoes. One of the reasons all those Olympic lifters can sit down is because they have a crazy heel elevation. Mm-hmm. It's a nice firm heel elevation, and they just sit there and they do it all the time. So if your goal is to squat lower, I'm too lazy to change my shoes. Like, I'll take them off maybe, but that's it. So I'm just going to limit my depth on my squat, and that is fine for me. If you're training Olympic lifting, you need to be in Olympic lifting shoes, because bodies don't squat that way. Bodies can't sit in the bottom of a squat with your arms overhead and not lose balance, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. So that's just, squat shoes or Olympic lifting shoes have their place, and they can be helpful if you want to load to greater depths. But I would also say you don't need them to train the squat or to learn how to squat.
Can you elaborate on that last bit a little bit more?
So it frees up some range of motion, right? So I can sit down deeper with load, where load is more difficult for me to maintain my positions, right? So we talked about at least the load when, it's actually like a training load. If it's, a goblet squat, it's more easy. We talked about that too. Mm-hmm. But if it's training load, it's hard. I've got more things to juggle, more plates to spin while I'm doing my squat. So I have to not only not get crushed by the weight, but I also have to keep my balance, and I also have to not turn my low back on too much too soon, so that I can sit all the way down. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, the question is, and this distinction comes up on many occasions, there is a carryover here. I want to make sure it's important that I say this, but there is a distinction between health and performance. There is definitely a carryover there. I do think that there is a foundation of health for high level performance, but at the same time, you see some of the highest performers in the world whose health is absolute poop, right? But there is going to be a distinction there. It's like a Venn diagram. There will be a crossover, but they're not the same thing, right? Squatting to lift as much weight as possible is going to be a different conversation, a slightly different story than trying to squat as biomechanically perfect as we can. And this gets into that distinction of just exercise selection. And what is the goal of the exercise I am doing right now? And I talk about this a lot, but I think it's something that people just don't do. If I'm giving you this exercise, am I giving this to you as an output exercise? Meaning I'm chasing a performance quality. I'm trying to improve strength. I'm trying to improve hypertrophy, or I'm trying to improve power. Really our big three. Or am I giving you this exercise because I'm trying to improve the movement itself? And there is a distinction between those two, right? As an example, if I'm trying to improve the movement itself on a squat, I don't know if there's a better just squat movement pattern builder than a 2 kettlebell front squat. To this day, I still think that a 2 kettlebell front squat is maybe the best way for you to really just improve the squat as a movement pattern. But the 2 kettlebell front squat is not going to be the thing I'm going to use if I'm really trying to drive up strength, hypertrophy, and power, right? Because I'm going to be really limited on that at some point. I can only hold so much load, 2 kettlebells in a front rack. But it's a great movement pattern builder. If I care more about the performance outcome, I'm going to go with the safety bar or a hack squat, something in that realm, where I can really push load and velocity but I can still do it within the confines of this is generally what I want a squat to look like, right? It's not going to be perfect because I'm putting a lot of load here. I know it's not going to be perfect. As long as it's within the realm of acceptability, I can be happy, right? That's where my brain goes a lot on these things. But again, when I'm chasing it from a performance standpoint, I'm still not going to let somebody just do this crazy sit back, hinge, knee out thing because it's not a squat.
Yes. Like I was going to try to segue us there.
Yeah. Cause like, and that's the point. Like we need to have confines. We got to put up, similar to when you go bowling, there's guardrails. If I give you an exercise, I have guardrails in my minds of this is what it needs to look like within this range. And if we keep doing the person where my first motion in my squat is my chest falls forward and my hips shoot back and I keep sitting back and my knees keep going out and my shin angle stays vertical, that ain't going to fly. That's not going to get the job done unless you want to be a low bar squatter and compete in powerlifting. You people are taken out of this conversation. You do not apply. For everybody else listening, that's just not going to work. That's a no bueno.
So I would also argue that the low bar hinge variation of the squat is really hard if you want to do powerlifting raw.
Yeah.
Because it's difficult to get the depth
without
that you need
suit
to get through white lights. Yeah. Yeah. Without the suit.
So I think you're seeing more people in that realm going with it's not a true high bar, but it's also not a true low bar. There's somewhere in the middle of these two worlds, right?
This is funny that you're talking about that because I spend very little time reading what other people write on the internet. But when I see stuff that says, so I'm thinking I'm going to blame Reddit. So when I'm on Reddit and I'm looking at somebody ask for advice about their squat, a lot of times they'll say, I've been doing a low bar squat. Or I looked it up and I think I should do a low bar squat. Or somebody will say, you should move to a low bar squat because you're going to be able to do more weight that way. When I hear that, I know your squat sucks. Because you obviously, I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years, so you shouldn't know the difference between a testing squat for mobility and biomechanics versus a training squat for performance like I do, because I have the experience, right? So I don't blame you for that, but I do know that I would want to fix your squat if you would default to a low bar squat, because I think you would find it much easier to hit your depth, and you would be way less concerned about not hitting your lifts if you just knew how to squat with a higher bar position. Because if I go low bar, I have to hinge more. And then I just have 2 deadlifts and a bench press. You know, I have a good morning, a bench press, and then I have a deadlift for my, raw powerlifting meet or whatever.
Yep. But
for athletics, it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. That's where I was going to go next.
Okay, good. So it doesn't make any sense to do a hinge. I mean, you can deadlift, and deadlifting is great. And deadlifting teaches us
rack pull. You have a lot of hinge options that are hinges.
Why do you have to put it on your shoulders to do it? You could just hold it in your hands, get grip training at the same time. That would be great. So that's my biggest issue with squatting that way. If you want to hinge, do a normal hinge. Like, you could do good mornings. That's fine if you want, if you need the accessory lift. I don't really find the need for them very often, but you could do them for sure. But if you're going to squat, you should train the squat. You should try to stay upright, and you should try to let your ankles bend a bit, because then you're actually going to load and feel your quads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
the point that I wanted to make was, for athletics, like I need that variability of positions that I can achieve and work from. So one of them might be bending over and, whatever your sport is, picking someone up. And one might be dropping down, getting under them and pushing away, and, thinking about alignment or whatever. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, so think about I've been thinking about cycling lately. if I push really hard on the bike, or okay, 5 years ago, if I pushed really hard on the bike, I would throw my head side to side and I would really feel like I'm doing a lot there, and my neck would suck. My neck would hurt so bad after. It'd be tight for days. I'd get a headache, whatever. I received a comment on a post. I don't know. I think I was filming somebody else, and this guy trains cyclists, and he said, "Don't you think they're losing a lot of force in the pedaling that way?" And I was like, you know what? You're right. That is a great point. And so if you try this, if you're this type of person and you push really hard, try training with a little like squat position. So slight torso lean forward. I'm mostly upright, and it looks like, I got a stick in my ass, but I'm pushing now down into the pedal, and I can move when I need to move, so I don't lose my momentum on the pedal. You'll actually, I've seen it. I saw it. My buddy Mike Camperini and I were working out the other day, and he was biking like that, and I cued him on that, and he pushed down. He was like, it's weird. I felt like I wasn't trying as hard, but my wattage went up. So it's just that squat position can be better for producing force. Like if I need to jump, I need to know how to squat. I don't need to necessarily know how to hinge.
Mm-hmm. Or land from a jump.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's one of those things, it's an older episode people can go back and find with Ty. I had Ty on, we talked about this from the Atlanta Hawks, and Ty had mentioned he likes to use the squat as that assessment tool also, because he's like, I want to be able to see an athlete squat in a phone booth. I will say that Ty has phenomenal coach speak. It is always on point. Great coach speak. But the squat in a phone booth concept is super important because we were talking about agility and change of direction. These other athletic qualities we want people to have. And Ty talked more in detail about being able to squat in a phone booth and how that ties into athletes being able to actually receive force, stop force, turn that force around, and it being really important. And that's where when we train a squat, that's why it gets me so upset when I keep seeing everybody mess this up. Exactly. You're not training a squat, so you're missing out on all of this. You're just doing more and more glorified hinges in a really bad position, right? So the squat should be a more vertical displacement of the pelvis activity. Your knees should go forward out over your toes. You should be more upright. This is not a hingy activity. It is a straight up and downish activity as much as we can manage it. And if it doesn't look like that, then you have probably picked the wrong variation for you, or it's being coached incorrectly, or it's being cued wrong. I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, then I can't back squat. You know what? Correct. You are right. Yes. The answer,
out.
Yeah, the answer to your question is yes. If you have a bar in your back and you can't do it, then stop doing it. Yes, this is the answer to your question. Use a safety bar. Use a hack squat. Do a front squat. We have so many other options at our disposal now that allow you to get your hands in front of your body to make this more of a squat and less of a hinge. Use a heel wedge. I don't understand why so many people are like, there are all these squat Nazis running around who feel like that it has to be done this one way. And if you use a heel wedge, it's cheating. If you use a safety bar, it's not a real squat. It's like, get over yourself. That's just not the case, right? Like, I'm not trying to compete in powerlifting. Neither of these other people. If we wanted to compete in powerlifting, then yes, that would be the case. I would have to play by the rules of your game, but it is not some just written rule of nature that a squat has to be done with a straight bar on your back. So I think the goal here when we're using a squat as a performance improving tool, we still need to keep it within the confines of what should that squat look like. And it should fit the characteristics of the things that we've been talking about throughout this episode.
So the thing that I want to add is you got me thinking about athletics a little bit more when you said Ty's name. So I thought about Lee Taft, and then I thought about the low box, and I thought about everything. It's great. One thing that's important, and I definitely want to mention this here because some of my Rebel clients are people who play team sports, right? And those are multi-directional team sports where I need to be able to change direction. I need to be able to decelerate so that I can get the edge on somebody, right? Specifically, taking a cut, making a cut. If I have to stop that way and I hinge to do it because I don't have hip mobility, because I don't have ankle mobility, or the reason that I don't have them is because I never train it because I squat like a hinge all the time, then I can't slow down, because to decelerate, I need to increase my shin angle, right? So it's just like, it doesn't just change your squat. It has a lot of other trickle down effects that will affect all sorts of other stuff. So just keep all that in mind.
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons we're so passionate about this particular topic, because we know when it's performed well, that it has a carryover effect to everything else you're doing in your training, to your overall athleticism. When it's done poorly, it has the opposite effect, right? You're becoming more and more of this very rigid 2x4 of a human that has less and less options at your disposal in terms of your ability to move and generate force and accept force, etc. Let's see here. Do you feel like there's anything else that we need to hit? I feel like we've done a pretty decent job on this one.
Oh yes, the last thing I do want to talk about. So we've bashed some really common cues, but I don't think we've really offered what we would do instead.
Okay. Yes, that's a good call.
So if I see so let's just, like, this is the most common scenario for me as a coach and for all the people out there listening. If you are the type of person who would default to a hingey type of squat and you would push your knees out, oh man. Okay, before I do this, I need to tell you, the problem with the knees out when I don't have a squat suit on is it's just as bad as the knees coming in. It's more shear force through the knee. The knee needs compression through the joints. But if I get the knee outside of the hip and the ankle, then I have this bowing effect and I put extra stress through the knee. That's also not good for you, right? And if you know, we talked about athletics, you're now more prone to roll your ankle if you're prone to push your knee out when you load your hip and ankle together, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to think about that. If I am cueing you and I don't want you to do that, and I don't want you to hinge over, I'm going to just correct in the total opposite end of the spectrum, right? So if you do a hinge squat with a bar on your back, I'm going to give you probably a goblet, maybe 2 kettlebell. If you're really strong, I might let you do a front squat, but you'll probably mess it up. So I probably won't. And you're just like, you're not going to be able to load as much, but that's because we need to break the cycle of the, incorrect technique that you've been training. You need to do something different if you're ever going to make the next step, right? So I want you to be super upright. I'll probably give you a heel elevation. I probably won't, because I'm kind of lazy about it and I wouldn't do it myself, right? But I would not blame you if you needed to. I might actually do it. There's people that I do it. So heel elevation, you're holding a weight in front of your body, and I would make you squat all the way down. And if you hold the weight in front of your body, you can keep your back pretty flat. And so the load that goes through there is okay. I might even have you push it out at the bottom so that you can feel some stuff shift around, especially if you don't keep your heels down. The biggest thing that I watch, if I coach exclusively remotely now, so if I watch somebody's video and I can only have half their body, I'm usually looking at the bottom half because I want to see your feet. I want to see what your feet are going to do. If your heels come up at any point during the squat, I'm a stickler. I'm like, you got to stop. You got to go slower. You got to pause there. We got to change the exercise because you obviously can't do this. I don't get very mad, but I just want to, I want to make the point very clearly. Heels stay down. That's what allows the ankle to move. Heel elevation helps me sit, helps me stay vertical, and therefore helps me correct the hip position. So I like those things. Biggest cues that I give are keep your feet flat, push through the heels. And then I fix whatever needs to be fixed after that. Sometimes people will come out of the squat, their butt will come up, and then their shoulders will come up. And in that case, you're doing it on the way down, but you're just going back to your old ways on the way up. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to good morning that weight back up. And so at that point, I say, okay, when you squat up, I need you to just push your butt forward. Keep it more underneath you. Try to get it underneath you sooner, and then finish with your heels. And so we come back to the heels, and we drive hip extension at the right time. We don't want to flex all the way, keep the flexion as we extend the knee, and then come out of it like a hinge. We want to unload, we want to load, bend every joint at the same time, and unload, unbend, extend every joint at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some cues I really like in this realm: feet like tree roots into the floor. I've always really liked, I found that when people get that sensation and they get their feet like tree roots into the floor, they get this inherent kind of posterior weight shift. They end up finding their feet, they end up finding their heels, they feel their hamstrings turn on. I really like cueing people to pull themselves down into the bottom of the squat. I feel like a lot of people just passively just drop it like it's hot. Yeah. But I want you to actively use your hamstrings to physically pull yourself down into the bottom of the squat. And once we're there, I have a very similar cue. I just want you to push the floor away to stand up. And I like the cue, if you push the floor away and the first thing you do is you shoot your ass out, then yeah, like push the floor away, but push your hips forward. Keep your butt forward. Or again, I'll come back to your asshole's not underneath your ears. Right, when we push the floor away, your asshole's got to be underneath your ears. Right? And then there are a lot of other things that you can use. And if you're having a really hard time getting this, again, it just means you're in the wrong exercise for you right now. Right? This is where you need to use the tools and the other things at your disposal to make it so that the squat looks this way. That's using a heel wedge. That's using a load that's in front of your center of gravity, right? Maybe once we get a little bit better at this, we go to a Zercher squat, because I think a Zercher on a ramp is another really good way to drill and work on this thing. But like, be strict about this with yourself. Most people are not. And it ends up, you're just playing a dangerous game that almost always catches up to you. It's just a matter of when is it going to catch up to you. Right. And I think
it's not that you can't. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you had.
It's not that you can't load the squat. It's not that you never are going to be able to back squat again. It's just you're forcing yourself to play a game that is not really well suited for you at this moment in time. And I don't need all your training sets to be goblet squats. Maybe I do if you're really bad at it. And in which case, I'm going to give you a lot more volume so you can still train. Mm-hmm. And you got to be a stickler about losing your position, because otherwise you're not going to get the technique improvements that you're looking for, but you're also not going to get a training effect, right? You can use goblet squats, for example, or you could use the heel wedge as the heel raise as priming tools. And sometimes what you might notice is if you do 5 sets of 10 goblet squats with a heel elevation, that maybe you could do a safety squat bar squat after, or maybe you could even do like a half range of motion back squat after, because now you've mobilized those joints. You're not going to be able to just jump back into the weights that you used to do, because as soon as you feel that weight on your back, you're going to go back to the stabilization pattern that you know, which is arch my back and take a bow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say that in this realm, I'm not the most patient person that I know. And so sometimes, and a lot of the clients we coach aren't that patient either. And I understand a lot of people, the patience required to pull yourself back and check your ego to really like go back to goblet squats is really hard, right? If you still want to push the squat, then that's where I think you just need to rely more on external constraints and references to almost make it impossible for you to mess it up, right? That's where, again, we're going to go back to this idea of, okay, if I can get you on a hack squat, perfect. I don't know if you can mess up a hack squat. Like, I think it's the easy, literally, I don't know how you could mess it up, right? You have tons of constraints. You're laying on a thing. I have pressure all going down your back, so I can cue you to feel your back into this pad. You're going to sit straight down just because of the way the machine's built. Or, again, I can play around with giving you a safety bar, giving you a heel wedge. maybe some other external modalities. I'm using external tools to essentially force you into an acceptable biomechanics pattern that we can really load and get after and have some fun with. And then maybe in your warm-up or other places in your workout, I'm going to trickle in and give you more of these goblet squats, 2 kettlebell front squats, so that we're both happy, right? Because I know that a lot of people listening are just going to essentially, they're not patient enough, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving you both, because I need you to be happy in training and having fun. So that's where we're just going to use more tools and external constraints to make the squat look like a squat. And then other places in training is where I'm going to really hammer this more sensory motor component to get the changes in the movement pattern I'm looking for. Then hopefully we blend those two worlds together over time, kind of like a convergent approach to periodization type situation.
The last thing that I would like to add is it's not as cool, but a lot of people can still get a training effect with single leg training.
Oh yeah.
So I would still drill the squat pattern, but I might load a single leg pattern. And if you do, I would prefer a split squat because it's less dynamic. You're not moving your stance at all, or static lunge kind of position. So both feet are staying down. I just come straight down, come straight up. You can still train the knee coming forward. But now I've introduced a little bit of room to play with the positions and all, and you can still load that stuff up. Like you can do hundreds of pounds on a barbell if you're strong, and it's pretty cool. It just, when you say, this is what I did in the gym today, it doesn't mean anything to anyone. So you have to be able to get past that hurdle. But if you can get a great training effect and increase your biomechanics at the same time.
Yeah, I will definitely piggyback on that, because I have found that if I just have a really hard time or can't get somebody into a loaded squat that I'm happy with, that I can at least live with, then we have to pull it out. And that's where I'll go directly to what you just mentioned of, okay, we're going to hammer this pattern with goblet squat variations, with 2 kettlebell front squat variations, and Zercher squat variations. We're not really going to move a ton of load in those, but we're going to get that squat pattern cleaned up so we can load it later down in the programming. So where we are going to get the stimulus for performance is going to be a single leg movement. And we've talked about that before. I think we had a whole podcast on training on one leg, right? I've had guys that go 400 plus pounds for a double on each leg with a safety bar reverse lunge. Like, you can still move a lot of load and get strong as piss in a lunge. Right. And so I think that adjustment is another tool that you can potentially use in your own training of, if I'm having a really hard time getting the squat right, but I still want to be able to load and push weight and get a big training effect for my lower body squat type stimulus, just load the piss out of a unilateral variation instead is a really easy option to fall back on. And then only other note I was going to say here, because you were talking about this progression of a squat over the course of a program for somebody that's maybe looking to improve their squat pattern. I think the pyramid method program that we have in the shop from you does a really good job of making that happen. So if somebody wants to see what that looks like over a program in terms of moving from a goblet to a 2 kettlebell to a front squat to a back squat, how you may actually manage that with everything else, highly recommend going to look at pyramid method, because you'll be able to actually see that done for you. And then you just have to follow along.
Yeah. It's the slow but more sure method of kind of, I don't want to say rehabbing, but retraining this pattern, acclimating to more volume and setting yourself up for success down the road.
I think that's the important one. We'll end on this point because we're coming up on an hour, which is longer than we had planned on. But you have to think long term. What is your long term potential? Where can you be in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? If you're willing to take a step back and improve this now, your ceiling becomes so much higher. It sucks in the short term because you have to ego check yourself, right? But what you're going to be capable of is going to be so much greater over the long term, as opposed to not working on it now and continuing with the same frustrations and problems. Your potential just won't be as great for improvement. That's why it's called the pyramid method, right? The larger the foundation of the pyramid, the higher I can take the peak. And that's the idea here. But you have to be willing to step back and work on this stuff if it's a problem for you. And to maybe keep your mind open and stop thinking about the squat as a sit back, knees out, because it's just not, we just need to stop with it.
It's a solved problem. We don't
I thought
need
it was.
to do it that way anymore.
I thought it was a solved problem. I'm clearly very wrong because still see it everywhere all the time. This is why I just want to live on a farm.
You're living your best life. Hopefully this changes at least one person's mind.
Yeah, maybe one person listening to this will change what they're doing. But everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you have further questions on this topic, if you want help with this sort of thing, because we know that if you've been in the sit back, knees out camp and you're really married to that, you may not love what we're saying. You may have further questions. If that's you, totally fine. Go shoot us a DM on Instagram, drop us an email at hello@rebel-performance.com. We're happy to have a conversation to help out and to further the discussion that was started here. Otherwise, everybody have a fantastic rest of your week. Lance, thanks so much, man.